dear guests, dear speakers, good morning. It is my great pleasure to welcome you at the Swiss mission to the European Union for what is the first Swiss Breakfast 2022. Today, we will discuss solutions to reach net zero emissions. Switzerland and the EU have committed themselves to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. To reach this ambitious yet essential goal, we have a number of tools at our disposal: regulatory measures, investments, as well as research and innovation to make our economy more efficient when it comes to achieving the green transition. Carbon removal, carbon capture and storage, CCS, and carbon capture and utilization, CCU, are among the tools that are expected to contribute to the objective we committed ourselves to, in the EU as well as in Switzerland. What do we need for these technologies to really play their part in the climate transition? What regulatory framework do we need? How can we increase commercial storage and improve transport systems? How will we further the development of these technologies? How can we best manage the impact of their large-scale implementation on societies? And, of course, how can Switzerland, as an important innovation hub on the continent, contribute to the uptake of these technologies in Europe? As part of the Green Deal, the European Commission is planning to move ahead with respect to these technologies. Swiss universities are well known for their research excellence. So I'm very happy that we have two speakers representing these two worlds: Christian Holzleitner from DG Climate and Professor Matotti from the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. I am very much looking forward to listening to what our distinguished experts have to say about it, as well as the discussion with the audience. I will now give the floor to Mr. Remo Hess, who will moderate the upcoming debate. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your introductory remarks. Maybe one word from my side. My name is Remo Hess. I'm correspondent for Swiss newspaper group CH Media here in Brussels, and I normally report about the whole range of EU affairs, but also NATO, and of course also the always exciting topic of Swiss-EU relations. But today we are here to speak about another most pressing issue, and more explicitly how we can manage our energy production and how we can source our societies, and at the same time fulfilling our promise to reach zero emissions by 2050. As the ambassador said, it is clear that we need to accelerate our emissions reduction, but we also have to go towards a circular economy and apply some negative emissions technologies. And I am happy to have here two experts on my side that can elaborate exactly on these subjects. So we will start with Marco Matotti, who is for 25 years a professor at the Federal Institute of Technology, the ETH Zurich, and is currently managing a project with the name Demo Up Karma, with the aim to explicitly upscale and develop such carbon removals technologies. So Marco, maybe you could tell us what exactly are you doing and why is this so important?
Yes, thank you very much, Remo. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for the invitation and for discussing this topic. So why is it important? Because when many sectors in the society, so mobility, power generation, heating for households and industry will be decarbonized, as we have to do, there will still be sectors that will keep emitting CO2. They cannot be decarbonized. Take agriculture, aviation, production of chemicals and cement, the waste treatment, right? And to contrast this, we need to do four things. We need to capture CO2 from industries that will keep emitting CO2. We need to collect all the biogenic CO2 that is easily available, and this is CO2 that has been uptaken from the atmosphere by plants and vegetables when they grow, and it's been transformed into biomass and then in biogas and CO2. This can be collected from municipal waste, for example, from pulp and paper industry, from wastewater treatment plants, and even directly from the air, right? And then this CO2 should be either used and stored, for example, in concrete, or it should be transported and stored underground in so-called CO2 geological storage. And the technologies to do these things are available. We know how to capture CO2. We know how to transport CO2. We know how to store it underground. We've been doing it for more than 20 years. We know it's safe. But in order to make this possible, we need to develop, we need to solve systemic issues. For example, develop an infrastructure that handles the CO2. And we can discuss this more in detail later. I believe that Switzerland is indeed at the forefront in these technologies, both in terms of innovation. We have startups like Climeworks, Neustark, Synelion, working in sectors that are relevant here. And we're also moving towards demonstration. And that's where the project that I'm happy to coordinate, DEMOP Karma, which means demonstration and upscaling of carbon dioxide management solutions for a net zero Switzerland, so DEMOP Karma, is it's relevant here. It's a project that is funded and supported by the Swiss Federal Office of Energy and the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. And it involves more than 20 Swiss partners, plus 2 international partners. And we demonstrate the 2 routes that I mentioned before, with the company Neustark for the storage of CO2 in concrete, and for the pioneering Icelandic company Carbfix for the storage underground. And by moving forward with this project that is happening at this very moment, I think we are really contributing to to a more sustainable future for Switzerland, but also for everybody, I hope.
Here maybe a little comprehension question without going already into the nitty-gritty of carbon capture, storage and utilization. If I understand right, there are 2 pathways. Either you capture the CO2 and you utilize it, either to grow vegetables or produce mineral water, and also to build houses with low CO2 concrete, or either, that sounds to me be a very good way in view of a circular economy. But there is also the pathway to store it underground for hundreds of years. What is better? Is it better to use it in circular economy or to store it or are there also some good reasons to store it underground?
Well, I think that to make our society sustainable, we need to use all possible technologies and solutions, right? We are talking here about CCS and CCU, not because we don't think that renewables are not important. I mean, we need to do everything, but I'm convinced for the reasons I said that CCS will play an important role. We will need it, right? Now, between storing CO2 and utilizing CO2, there are important differences that one has to keep in mind, right? Normally, when you use the CO2, this circular economy sense that you said, CO2 is then re-emitted. So it's not really a removal of CO2. You avoid emission, but basically CO2 is used and then re-emitted. And to use it, you need to invest a lot of energy. And this has to be clean energy, carbon-free energy, and this is the problem. This is the problem, because we don't have this carbon-free energy today, right? Storage is, it's an end-of-pipe, as we call it, solution. So when you store the CO2, you bring it back to where it came from, right? Because fossil fuels come from the underground, and we use them. If we capture and store CO2, we bring carbon back under our feet, right? So I think both have a role. So I would say CCU, do it when you have very clean power, carbon-free power. Otherwise, it's not a good idea.
So CCU and CCS, we have learned, are some crucial technologies to reach net zero by 2050. Some describe it also as some kind of a magical solution to go even beyond zero emissions and go to historical levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. Christian, maybe you could explain to us what are CCU and CCS, or in general carbon removal technologies, play a role in what role they play in the wider Green Deal and climate policy of the EU Commission.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Good morning. Thanks very much for the invitation. As an Austrian, I feel, of course, very much at home here in Switzerland. And so let me try to, what Marco already said, to put it into policy objective, policy actions, and the usual language that we use here in Brussels. And let me start really with the overall objective of climate neutrality in 2050. So we want to become the first climate neutral economy. So this means we don't want to add any more CO2 to the atmosphere. And for this, in the first place, we must reduce the use of fossil carbon. There's no way around that. And there are not only climate reasons, but unfortunately, as we've seen in the last days, there are also very good geopolitical reasons why we should do this, why we should become more independent. But, it's also, as Marco said, at the end, there will still be some emissions in the system, not least from agriculture, from livestock production, from the use of fertilizers. So we must take the CO2 out of the air. We must remove it, we must store it in our soils, in our forests, and then also in the products that we produce out of it, and then technological solutions, geological storage underground, like in the empty gas fields of the North Sea. So where does this lead us? So I think what is important to have in mind when we talk about that future perspective is there will be a new market for carbon in 2050. Carbon will be a very valuable commodity because we'll still need carbon. We need food. We need it as a feedstock. We need it to produce bioplastics, fibers, and a lot of other things. And we'll still also need it for energy because we will have a world without fossil carbon, but we still need carbon. And for that, we need to get ready. And this is what we tried to sketch out in our communication from last December on sustainable carbon cycles. So we must find ways how to produce non-fossil carbon in a more sustainable way. So when we grow biomass, when we grow our food, we must do it in a way that already during that we store more carbon in the forests, in the soils. Then we need to find other ways how to get carbon. Direct air capture, you talked about Climeworks. This is something that's very, very hot topic now. We also need, as also said, to get the CO2 out of waste streams, so this is all circular economy. And we need to use then this carbon more sustainably. Because we will hopefully have more cheaper energy through renewables, for wind and solar. So we don't need biomass so much more for the production of energy. We need to use it as a feedstock in industry. So we must change the way we use biomass. And if you look in our modeling, we need a lot of also of air capture. So in particular, what we would see that CO2 captured from the air could be one of the sources for aviation fuels. So we have an idea where we need to be in 2050. And we are very much at the beginning of this journey. So what we want to do now is to support all these very interesting but also still very challenging projects. So it's about scaling up, really taking the technologies that we know, like so many other climate technology, take them out of the lab, test them at the industrial scale. And this is what we want to do like until 2030. And we come to that, we also do some legislation on this. And then we need to start a reflection, how do we integrate these new types of carbon in a better way into our climate policies, into the agricultural policies after 2030. And that's a reflection that we also need to start now. So now it's about getting like the groundwork done, providing enough financing to test out all of these technologies, and at the same time talking about how can we get into this new carbon market in 2050. Just to end, you must keep in mind in 2050, if we are successful, there's not anymore an emission trading system because we don't have fossil fuels anymore. It will be a new market for carbon, and it will be, so to say, a market for good carbon that's not bad for the climate.
Thank you. You said we have to get ready and we have to do it fast. So Marco, from your point of view, very practical perspective, what are maybe the biggest challenges to scaling up and developing and rolling out these technologies? But before you answer, let me also launch the poll. We have exactly this question also for you. You can scan the QR code on your cell phone to answer this question, but on the online public can, of course, vote directly. And the question is, what are the biggest challenges for scaling up carbon removal technologies, CCS and CCU? Please take your vote. So Marco, from your practical point of view, what are for you the biggest challenges in scaling up?
Yes, I'm happy to discuss this, but am I allowed to make a comment
Sure.
about what Christian said? Because you mentioned the circular economy many times, and for me it's very important. I have to say that, I mean, I'm Italian and Swiss, and waste treatment plants are very important in Switzerland and are despised in Italy for reasons that I don't understand. So I believe in recycling. No, in Swiss waste treatment plants, they recycle precious material, metals. They generate heat and power. They dispose of waste, of course, and they will also capture and exploit CO2 because part of this CO2 is biogenic. So circular economy is very important to me. But we have to keep in mind that it's not enough to look, sorry Christian, to look at the cycle of the carbon atom, for example, in synthetic jet fuels, right? Because one captures the CO2 from air, makes a synthetic fuel, and then uses it, and CO2 goes back to the atmosphere. It's circular. But it's not only material balances, there are also energy balances. In order to do this, to allow for this circular economy of carbon, you need a lot of clean energy. And this is not circular at all, because it has to come from some way, and it's used, and then it's gone, right? And of course, somebody says that solar energy is infinite, right? But the problem, to collect the solar energy, we need to install solar panels that require materials. So they also have a penalty, let's say, in terms of resources, right? So when we talk about circular economy, I'm 100% with you, but we have to consider everything, not just one element of a cycle. That was my comment. About the challenges to deploy CCS, CCU, I would like to mention basically three. No? If you think of, supply chains, for example, what we're working on now in the Mapkarma, we want to take CO2 from Zurich and bring it, or burn and bring it to Iceland for storage, right? So we have a long supply chain where we need a lot of elements. We need CO2 capture, we need transportation, we need maybe pipelines, we need a storage site, right? And all these elements must be present at the same time to make the supply chain effective. If one of the elements is missing, all the efforts to build the others is wasted, right? And that's, of course, an important question. Who starts first? Who takes the risk of the first investment when they don't know whether the other elements of the chain are going to come along? So I think that here we need guidance, also from and I think political leadership. That's the first point. No? The second point is that, of course, if you want to mitigate CO2 emissions, again, for example, from a waste treatment plant in Switzerland, well, you need to locally capture the CO2, build a plant, etc. But then transporting and storing CO2 requires other partners at the national level, at the regional level, requires legislation, carbon pricing, that are not local anymore. So if you decide to install solar panels, you can basically power your house. It's a local decision, local implementation. You don't need the others, right? But for this, you need your canton, your country, and Europe to have a solution. And I would say that the third point is, if we go for storing CO2 underground, we need storage hubs that are available for everybody, because now we know, so the CO2 that has been stored so far has been stored by a private company, their own CO2 put in their own storage site, but we need storage hubs available for other countries, other companies. There are two that are coming up in Iceland, in Norway, but I think we need more. We need some also in continental Europe, and I think that we need more that are decoupled from the oil and gas sector. So these are my three, let's say, hopes that we can address these challenges. Yeah.
It's clear where you are addressing these hopes too as a researcher, and it goes in this direction. But maybe this is a good moment also to bring in Sophie Wenger from the Federal Office of Environment, the Swiss representative here in the room. Maybe, Sophie, you could explain us what are the priorities for Switzerland. What is Switzerland aspiring in terms of CCS and CCU, and what are the hopes also from EU policy decision making when it comes to Switzerland?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being able to be here. So I'm Sophie Wenger. I'm a Swiss climate policy officer in Bern at the Federal Office of the Environment. And I would like to bring the message that Switzerland wants to be a pioneer in the field of carbon capture and storage and carbon removals. And this is not only because we need these technologies to address hard-to-avoid emissions and to fulfill our obligations under the Paris Agreement, it's also because we see attractive opportunities for Swiss research or for businesses. And one recent example is that last week we concluded an agreement with Swiss waste incineration plants, which were mentioned by Professor Matotti. And this agreement obliges the sector to invest by 2030 in a first commercial capture plant. And this then generates new demand for transport and for storage. So addressing the point that at every point in the chain we have to try to develop solutions and to increase demand. However, even though Switzerland is a global innovation leader, we cannot do it on our own. And it's simply because we, for instance, will not have enough storage capacity probably to address all our residual emissions. So we very much depend on cooperations. And therefore, we are, for instance, discussing with European countries like Iceland or Norway, or just yesterday we concluded an MOU with the Netherlands to see how we can work together, for instance, in the field of CO2 export or trading carbon removals. And it's absolutely crucial that this scale-up is done in a sustainable manner, and I think Europe shares the same view. So considering this, I think we have a lot of opportunities to cooperate and exchange between the EU, European member states, and Switzerland, particularly in the field of policy design, research, and business opportunities.
So you said Switzerland needs partners, needs international cooperation. Marco said also that one problem is the question, who takes the first investments? And if I look at our poll, the question, the answer, what are the biggest challenges for scaling up carbon removal technology, are also there are not enough investments, and there is one other answer is there is insufficient international transport network for CO2. So Christian, maybe how can the EU, the Commission, answer this somehow chicken and egg problem that there is not that nobody is doing the investment to develop a trans-European CO2 network because there is not so many people absorbing CO2 yet, and vice versa. How to address this chicken and egg problem? Can the Commission be the chicken who, how to say, breeds the egg or delivers the egg?
Yes, or the dog who takes care of all of them. No, we are working very, very concretely on that and very much on the ground. With the Innovation Fund, we've done our first call where we awarded almost 1.2 billion euros for 7 projects. And a lot of them are related to carbon capture, use and storage. So the one who fits best in this context is the district heating plant of Stockholm, which is run on bioenergy. And they have a project to capture the CO2 and store it under the North Sea. So that would be completely carbon removals. We have other CCS projects with fossil carbon. So our biggest one is in the Port of Antwerp, where BASF and Air Liquide would capture CO2 from 5 different sources, so from hydrogen different chemical processes, which will give us a lot of lessons how this capture technology works, because it's depending on how these waste streams are working. And then they also have the plan to store this under the North Sea. And in that project, what I'm very happy about is that they look also at different transport networks, not only pipelines, but they also want to build ships. And I come back to the network question. Then we have a cement plant in France, where they want to do also CCS, but as well CCU. We have a hydrogen project in Finland, where they also want to produce blue hydrogen, also with storage in the North Sea. And a little bit further away from the North Sea, we have a project in Spain, where they want to use municipal waste and produce methanol out of it. So, and of course, to get this going, we need the transport network. This is super essential. But now we have, with these projects around the North Sea, I think we have a very good opportunity to get this going. And we need a kind of a liquid market, both on the number of the capture facilities, as well as on the number of the storage facilities. The biggest ones are currently in Norway and in Netherlands. Iceland is something to develop. Denmark is looking into this. And we need several transport alternatives. So both with pipelines, with ships. So that we don't get into in any kind of a monopoly. We need competitive markets everywhere, and we need to create enough trust, someone who wants to capture CO2, that they are confident, okay, I have more possibilities of storage. In the same way, a storage provider should have the possibility to, or the expectations, there are more people who want to deliver the CO2 to my storage site. And we are working very concretely with the member states to remove any obstacles, like under the London Protocol, under the International Maritime Organization for the transport of waste. There are some agreements must be signed. We have, and this is so important as a legal framework, we have our CCS directive that calls for non-discriminatory access to transport to the storage sites. And this we need to implement now. As I said, we need to put the necessary trust in there that this will be a competitive market. And then, of course, what I forgot to mention, like the French project, they also look into transport by train, which would be then also for Switzerland, I think, a more interesting alternatives. So things are very much developing there. And I think if over the next 2-3 years, we get this going, this will be such an important sign for really having a European CCUS market with a sufficient number of capture facilities, of use facilities, of storage facilities, of different modes of transport. And of course, we are continuing with our calls for the Innovation Fund. We've just closed the second one with a volume of 1.5 billion. We want to launch in autumn another one, probably with even higher volume, because as the Commission said in the Repower EU communication, that we want to front load more money of the Innovation Fund for the early years, so that there's really sufficient financing to get all of these pilot projects going.
Marco, do you agree? Is there sufficient financing, or do you wish that the Commission would rather put out a big budgetary bazooka to promote these CO2 networks?
Yeah, well, there is always a lot of money and there is never enough money, right? So I would say, I would prefer to comment on what I think type of political leadership I think that the Commission could have to complement what you said, because I fully agree with what you said, and I think it's extremely important. So, and I would like to look at the European Union, but also at EFTA, because by chance Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, they belong to EFTA, right, and not to the EU, but they are so important, in this discussion. so I believe that EU and EFTA should kickstart this infrastructure. And I would like to say what they should do, I believe, to design and develop such infrastructure. First, they should map. They should map let's say, the industrial clusters that are the largest and that they are the most promising. Like, for example, Antwerp, right? It's an excellent example. Sweden, but we have other, Switzerland as well, because what Sophie Wenger said, it's an extremely important agreement that was made last week. You know, they start. They don't have the infrastructure to transport the CO2, but they start. Then we need to look at the prospective CO2 storage hubs, right? You mentioned the most, the closest, let's say, but we need more. We need to look at the waterways, the important one, and we need to look at the natural gas pipeline system, because it might be possible to refurbish it, or anyways we can use how's it called, the right of way, no, along this. And with these maps at hand, I believe that one should really design a backbone of a network infrastructure for CO2. And this should be done top down, not bottom up, in my opinion, right? So what is the backbone of an infrastructure to transport CO2? Along waterways, using pipelines. And this backbone should connect these promising industrial clusters with the storage hubs that are available. But then even more important, well, not even more important, as important is defining standards. Because you mentioned ships, that's super important. Trains, I mean, we are working on these things. There is not a standard that works for CO2 capture and storage, the type of things we are talking about. There are standards for carbon dioxide used as in the food industry, for example, right? But we need a standard, and this has to come from, I think, top down. So we need standards and we need specifications for the CO2 that is transported and stored, right? So what I advocate for is a combination of the bottom-up approach that you were basically alluding to, no, through the Innovation Fund and so on, with top-down mining, of course, but the bottom-up approach in terms of projects and initiatives, with also a top-down approach where, as I said, EU and EFTA take leadership in defining this backbone, defining standards, specifications that then can steer more projects and more initiatives.
Can I immediately respond to this? Because one of the actions from our sustainable carbon cycle communication is exactly to do such a study, to map out the industrial hubs and the networks. So our colleagues in DG ENER hopefully soon publish then the terms of reference for that, and of course I would hope to get a lot of good applications to map that out. I fully agree, because both if you look at the CO2, but also if you look at hydrogen, the localization of the industry in the future in Europe may look very different. Because now you have a lot of, industry always goes there where there's cheap energy. And so, of course, our current localization of industry is very much driven by, okay, where could you get cheap coal in the last centuries? Now we'll need to look for cheap renewable energy, which you would have maybe. You have in the north, you have in Switzerland, you have in Austria, the water, you have in the south. So, and that's so important that we also get that right. We are, and I think this is really big. It's really about changing our energy and industry infrastructure for the next 2-3 generations. So this is really not a task to be underestimated. On the standards. So what we are working on is what currently in DG Klima we are preparing is this proposal for the certification of carbon removals. Mm-hmm. So where currently the public consultation is ongoing, it's still open until 2nd of May, and where we want to cover all types of carbon removals. So we sketched that out also in the communication of last year. So what we call carbon farming. So how can you store more CO2 while you produce biomass, but then also what we call industrial use and storage of carbon. So where, how can you define more clearly how much carbon is stored, like in woody construction material, which is also a big topic for Switzerland, I guess. But also all the ways, and as you in the beginning very rightly said, Marco, we need a life cycle analysis. We need to look at the energy needs, already for direct air capture, already for bioenergy with CCS. And our certification proposal should also deliver these methodologies. So I would be very happy also, as you said, on the side of transport and so on, how could we also help with our certification proposal there? For me, it would be very much that we develop those methodologies and that they could then be used in different circumstances. Sure. So I would very much welcome also that maybe even in the public consultation, as you said, these challenges with the transport and so on, how we could help there with our proposal, I think that would be also very, very helpful.
Yeah, this is an important part of our DEMOP Karma project, actually, indeed working on these things. So I will be happy to exchange with you on this.
Okay. So since time is going forward, I think it would be good now to switch over to the question and answer session. I already see some questions coming in from the online participants, but I suggest if there is any question here in the room to address it first. So. Yes, please. There's a microphone somewhere. Yes, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm Thudy Bernier. I'm working for CO2 Value Europe. Basically, we're the European association representing the CCU value chain. So we represent companies, so CO2 emitters, CO2 converters, CO2 users, basically, that are committed to using CCU. And we also have a number of universities and research organizations as members. So thank you very much for the invitation and for this very interesting exchange on how to reach net zero by 2050. I just wanted to make like a clarification on what Dr. Matotti said about, so first of all, having renewable energy as a basis for CCU. That's really like the first element to bear in mind, and you're absolutely right in that. But some of the CCU processes will be about carbon removals, but others will be about reusing the CO2 by using renewable energy. And as was said previously, for example, substituting for example, kerosene that you would use in planes by, let's say, sustainable aviation fuel or synthetic aviation fuel. So there is this element of carbon removal, but there's also this element about producing basically more sustainable fuels, for example, via CCU, that are not necessarily carbon removals, but that can contribute basically to reducing our carbon footprint. And then the question that I wanted to ask to Mr. Alteiner is what else can you tell us from the carbon cycle communication from last year in terms of action? So you've mentioned the CRCM consultation ongoing. There's also a number of actions that are put forward, for example, on the replacing, as you said before, a fossil carbon feedstock by renewable carbon. For example, in chemicals, I think there's a target for 20% for bioplastics, for example. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about those actions. Thank you very much.
Yes, I think a lot of these actions, and what I find there also so fascinating, is to create products that don't have a negative impact on climate, maybe at the end even a positive one. So, and I think this is something that's hugely attractive for consumers as well as for financial investors, because they are looking for these climate positive businesses. So I think particularly for the bioeconomy, that's a big economic opportunity. But for getting this right, we need first to create trust and confidence in standards that what's happening there is really good for the environment, that it's not greenwashing. And I think a lot of NGOs are watching us very carefully on this, and I think rightly so, because like our experience also in the past at international levels with clean development mechanism and so on have not really worked out. So this is why I think the groundwork really has to be a very reliable certification on that, and also coming back again, how much energy do you need, and all of this, and building on that. I think then we need to go into like the carbon accounting of companies, or even and for products, to really see, okay, what is the impact there? I mean, we are coming out with the sustainable product initiatives, our colleagues in DG Grow and DG Environment. So, and I would hope that what we are doing at DG Klima on the carbon removal certification will feed into these standards. So I know that a lot of life cycle analysts that look at the product environmental footprints and so on are quite skeptical about a more dynamic analysis, how to integrate carbon removals. But I think we need those signals, those incentives, that we really come to a more sustainable, long-lasting use of CO2. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, which I think we shouldn't rush too much, because otherwise there's again this risk of greenwashing. And I think we should take the next years to really define this very, very, very well, with very robust standards.
This is something. Yeah. So I appreciate your work for CCU, but I would like really to clarify a couple of points, particularly with reference to, for example, aviation fuels, which is an important sector and very difficult to decarbonize, impossible to defossilize, actually. Well, we have three ways to get carbon, right? From fossil fuels, high content of energy; from biomass, high content of energy; from CO2, no energy at all, right? So if we want to use the carbon in CO2 in any useful way, we need to provide a lot of energy, right? As you said. And sometimes those who talk about CCU give for granted that they can decide to use renewable electricity to convert CO2 into use, for example, in synthetic fuels. But you cannot. You need to use the energy mix that is available. And if you use the energy mix available in Europe today, reusing the CO2 to make synthetic fuel is more climate negative than using fossil kerosene. And this is not rocket science, it's material and energy balances. That's, I think, very important to keep in mind, because otherwise we do something that is not useful. There is a fantastic paper by a colleague of mine, Andre Bardov, I can send it to you, on Science a couple of months ago on plastics, right? He looked at three options: using recycling plastic via pyrolysis and other ways, using biomass to make biopolymers, and using CO2 through reaction with hydrogen and Fischer-Tropsch, etc. And he optimized the system as a function of the energy mix available. And basically, only for electricity available with no carbon footprint, CCU played a role. As soon as the electricity was available with a carbon footprint above what wind energy gives you, then CCU was not an option. There was only reuse of recycling of plastics and the use of biomass. This has to be kept in mind. I mean, I would love to be able to reuse CO2 to make chemicals, but that's as I said, material and energy balances, thermodynamics that cannot be. It's a fight that you shouldn't take because you cannot win.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up. I really agree with you, and I think that our vision as CO2 Value Europe is to use CCU where it makes sense. So, for example, we're not advocating for using like synthetic fuels for cars, for example. We're saying like there are basically, as you said before, specific sectors like cement, steel, aviation, maritime, where basically it makes sense. And on what you said, so on availability of renewable energy, fully agreed with you on the fact that it's needed, but there's also this target of 70% of reduction of GHG emissions, right? So for your fuel to be considered as sustainable as synthetic aviation fuels, there is this methodology that the Commission is working on that those will be 70%, let's say, of savings in terms of GHG reductions. Sorry, I just wanted to make that clear. Sorry.
Thank you. We have to move on because there's not so much time left. One question I would really like to speak about is from Simon Stocker here from the chat. It's about CO2 prices. His question is, what role can CO2 prices play in enabling CCU, CCS and CDR technologies? And to my understanding, it's quite simple that CCU, CCS and CDR technologies do have to be cheaper than the actual CO2 price is in order to make it attractive to apply these technologies. Am I mistaken, or is this the basic mechanism of this? or more general, what do CO2 prices play for a role?
This is why we have the Innovation Fund. The current CO2 prices are, for a lot of these technologies, not sufficient. So even if we are now talking about CO2 prices in the emission trading system of 70, 90 euros, maybe this can get going CCS with fossil fuels in some cases. It can get going, I think, also hydrogen production. But if we look into direct air capture and so on, the price will not be sufficient. Also, because we don't have yet all those cheap renewables. But what we want to do now, and I think this is again a very careful approach, also reflecting what Marco said, is we want to test those technologies at industrial level, so that we are ready for this once we have this highest share of renewable electricity in the system. So this is what we are doing with the Innovation Fund. We look at the financial gap. So what are the costs that you currently cannot cover by the market price, by the carbon prices? And out of that, we currently finance 60%. We are now also looking, with the reform of the emission trading system, into something that's called contract for difference. So a little bit the way that also, like Germany and others in the last decade, drove the renewables into the system. So we would kind of ask, okay, we want to have so many carbon removals. Who can deliver them to us at the lowest price? And then we would pay the difference to the market price. So we would cover the full difference. There are a lot of details how to get it right, but we have a lot of experience from the renewable electricity on that, how wind and solar was brought into the market, so that you can go down this cost curve. I think also, as Marco said before, all these technologies are known, but it's about getting them at an industrial scale, getting down this cost curve, this 20-30% that you can get cheaper if you learn how to do this. And this is what we want to push over the next years, to learn how these technologies work at industrial scale. And then at the same time, we need to discuss how does the policy design look like after 2030, so that we can create the right market expectations over the next decades for this. But we still have to be very careful on, we first need to understand how these technologies work, how the standards work. And once we have that, then we can integrate them into our climate policies for our 2040, 2050 targets.
Are you happy with this answer, Marco, or would you advocate more guidance, more top-down approach to bring down the costs?
I think that we have to pay what the things cost, frankly. I like that you said that the cost can go down 20-30%. I can agree with that figure, not with figures that talk about reducing cost by orders of magnitude, because that's not possible. No? I flew yesterday and I compensated with Swiss, and Swiss offers you to compensate immediately or in 10 years, right? And the range was from 4 francs to 190 francs or something, right? Doable. I did it 0 years, so compensating immediately 190 francs. But you know the price per ton of this has a price per ton close to 1,000 francs per ton, okay? Which is the right price today, actually. So it's good that they ask you to pay 1,000 francs per ton, because that's the right price, the right cost, you know? So that's my position. We have to pay what is needed, but we have to do these things, whatever it costs.
I would like to take another question from the room, the gentleman over there.
Yes, so I'm Ragnar Semenseth from Norway's mission to the European Union, and thank you very much for a very interesting breakfast and a very interesting topic. Norway has been working on carbon capture and storage for quite a while. We've been doing it for around 25 years now, but that has been CO2 captured from gas production in the North Sea. So we are now establishing a full-scale chain for CCS in Norway, focusing on industry. And as Mr. Holzleitner mentioned on the Innovation Fund project, we also have projects capturing CO2 from a cement plant and from a waste incineration plant. And maybe the most relevant aspect of this in European context is that the transport and storage part of it is designed with excess capacity in order to be able to store CO2 from all around Europe, really. So we are very glad to see what is happening on CCS in Europe at the moment. We are very glad to see what the Commission is doing. And my question to Mr. Holzleitner is simply, what should we, as EFTA countries, Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, together with the European Union, do in order to promote this further? Thank you.
You should co-fund our Innovation Fund project. And you should invest in the infrastructure. So I think the model that we found with the Innovation Fund is, and I think which has now got a lot of acceptance, is we are focusing more on the capture facilities. So we are funding the capture facilities. And the great thing with the Innovation Fund is that we can not only finance the capital expenditure, but also the operating expenditure. So and by this, indirectly, we are funding the transport and the storage, because these are costs for the capture facility. But of course, it's very much, and I think this is what we are now seeing, even like after the first call of, and the projects that I referred to before, we need the storage capacity. So we also, I guess, need a certain risk-taking by countries like you, like the Netherlands, to invest into the storage capacity and to do it now. So to generate the trust in the market, there is enough storage capacity, and it will not be just for, I take now your example, Norwegian CO2 or Dutch CO2. This is a European market, and we need to have non-discriminatory access to this. And so to believe in this and to invest further in the storage, in the transport facilities, is something that, in particular those countries that have those capacities, I think it's super important, as I said, to create that necessary trust, so that also projects that happen more in Central Europe, but where there would be already now through shipping, through train transport, the opportunities then to store it with you.
Marco wanted to intervene, but can you also maybe in your intervention address the question, because Christian said we have to boost storage capacities, but I imagine there are also some social implications, because people who live around this in these countries, they were maybe a little bit afraid what was happening in recent years, because somebody took something out of the ground and now they're putting something back in, and yes, and there are some maybe some security risks that we also have to be addressed. So,
yes, I would say that Norway is investing in CO2 storage infrastructure, and I think I'm working with Sintef with Northern Lights. These developments, right, in CO2 storage hubs in Norway, in Iceland, in the Netherlands, they are kind of local. Then they are offered to all Europe, but they are developed fighting, for example, the public opinion in those countries, right? I think that it would be great if there were from the European Union and EFTA a kind of a top-down indication that we need to develop these storage hubs, because we need them, no? And not only in those countries, but also in Germany, for example. And I come to your question. In Germany, there are tens of seasonal storage sites for natural gas, underground storage sites. The technology is the same as to store CO2. Does anybody complain? Nobody complains, right? Do they want CCS, CO2 storage? Absolutely not, because it's dangerous, right? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any physical sense, right? It can be understood only because in storing natural gas there is a commercial interest. In storing CO2, so far there has been no interest, right? I think that as soon as some German company realizes that CO2 will be a commodity and one can make money out of it, they will develop storage sites also there, right? So, natural gas is more dangerous than CO2. and we store it underground and nobody is concerned. We have to store also CO2. But I think we need somehow a top-down, I insist on this, a top-down approach that says, good, Norway, fantastic, Iceland, great, Holland, the Netherlands also, but we need more. We need more strategic storage hubs in Europe to serve the European industry that we want to develop. And I want also to say something. What you said, Christian, earlier is super important, because sometimes people who, like me, we say we want to fight climate change. We need to, for example, save energy, reduce the consumption of energy, you know? And we are accused to be degrowth guys, right? But what you are talking about, a revolution in Europe, in the industrial sector, that's not the degrowth. That is growth, right? A lot of jobs, a lot of opportunities for business, but in the right direction, sustainable direction, not in the direction we've had so far that goes, well, against the wall, right? So we want growth, but in the right way.
But I think it's rather the challenge whether we find enough capacities to do what we want.
Sure. Yes.
Just think about energy efficiency. The number of mancraft, of employees we would need there to finance the renovation of all our housing stock. I mean, this is economics pure, this is growth. And we need a lot of investment, because a lot of these technologies that we are talking about are more about fixed costs with very low operating and marginal costs. And so what we are doing now is we are investing for the future generations. The future generations will benefit of what we are doing now, because they will have very cheap energy available. Both because we are getting much more energy efficient, because we are investing into renewables, we are investing into a more circular economy. But for this, we need to invest now. And I think this is also why also in the recovery and resilience plans, we see so many investments there and what we are pushing there for climate action. But what we are proposing here with the Green Deal is a pure investment program over the next 2-3 decades. So this has nothing to do with degrowth.
Thank you. Since we are slightly approaching the end of our debate, I would like to take one question that was also addressed here in the chat, and that it has been the elephant in the room, because of course our debate does not take place in a political vacuum. And the question is, what is the impact in your view of the crisis in Ukraine on the discussion on CCS and CCU? I mean, it's a very large question, but since the shift in energy policy that maybe is going on in Europe will also imply that some countries, like for example Germany, could maybe rely for a longer time on high emissions technology like coal. So what do you make out of this? Maybe the question goes for you both.
So it's an easy question to finish. So I think that I think that the learning is that being dependent on energy coming from somewhere else is a problem, right? We knew that, but now we know it even better. So I think we need to reduce the use of energy. So I think that the high energy prices are actually good, as Mr. Gutierrez said yesterday or the day before yesterday. You know, high energy prices are good because they will force us to find ways to reduce the consumption of energy. First. Second, if we can decentralize the energy provision, so more renewables rather than fossil, that's better because we are independent of geopolitical considerations. So that's, to me, what I learned. So less energy use, and more decentralized.
No, I think that it reinforces what we've been trying already with our Fit for 55 proposal. You need to think about the social impacts, about the transition that we need to finance. So this is why in our proposal we've given so much attention to the use of the revenues from the emission trading system. And we're proposing a social climate fund to give also those lower income member states, lower income households, the necessary financial capacity to invest in those good things that we need for the transition. And I want to insist on this. It's not so much about, we're not going to technologies that cost more, we are going to more competitive energy. But we need to invest more upfront in the fixed costs of those technologies. And the revenues that we have from the higher energy prices, from the higher carbon price, we really need to invest them for the good things, for the investments. And I think if we do this, we master that challenge. And of course, we need to provide, in the meantime, the relief, in particular for lower income households, of the higher energy prices. And this can be done in clever ways, or it can be done in stupid ways. And you see a lot of different proposals there, also at the member state level. And but I think that this can be done, and it's the right way to go in the long term, and I think also in the short term.
Okay, thank you. That's a good word to end the discussion. It can be done. It just has to be done. So I would like to thank you for your participation in the discussion. Also, Sophie Wenger from Swiss authorities here in the room. And I hope you didn't only enjoy your Swiss breakfast, but also found a little bit of food for thought here in our discussions. And yes, maybe to our online participant, please stay a little bit online. If I may ask you to answer our little survey about the Swiss breakfast. And with this, I would like to close the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.